Okay, so in the last video, we talked about how to launch a new EC2 instance that we're going to be utilizing for both the development of our applications as well as hosting our websites as well that we create. All right, so a couple things here is once you have established that the EC2 instance is running, you can kind of see the state here is running healthy. The status checks are both passed, so it looks good there. When you click on the instance you've created, there's a whole slew of information here that you can get access to. It'll tell you kind of what availability zone it's in. It will also give you information, kind of like we said, we know how big of the instance type it was, the running state. It will also give you information about its private IP address that it uses internally, but as well it's going to give you information about the public. So every EC2 instance is going to be have a public IP. It may not always have a public IP address depending on what you're trying to do, but for our purposes, what we've done it, we have a public IP address. So technically, this EC2 instance is reachable through the internet. There's also going to be a DNS, public DNS name here that also we can use as well too, and we'll talk about how to do that here shortly. A few other things kind of worth noting is we did set up a security group. So that's our security group. If you want to get a list of all your security groups you have, right? Remember that's the firewall. So here's our security group we created for this application. We can kind of see the rules that we have. So there's our rules we created, so we can get to this website through RDP, and we can also get to it through HTTPS as well as through HTTP, right? So we can reach that using all of those ports, so we can access those services. Okay, so that's what the security group is, and you can kind of see I have some other ones out here. When you start using AWS, you're going to you'll probably have a lot of these. So just it's good to have a good name so you can kind of keep track of which one you're referring to. That's kind of why I named it the way I did. So I want to make sure it's straightforward in terms of what I'm doing. All right, if I go back to the EC2 dashboard, all right, here is where you see the details of your application. A couple things we're going to connect here in a second, but a couple actions here. Instance state. This is where you would start and stop your instance. So again, since we want to make sure that we stay within our budget, anytime that we are not going to be using this, we want to go ahead and go to actions and stop the instance. So start and stop are equivalent to if this was a physical laptop or something in front of you, starting and stopping it, turning off, turning it back on. You can turn it back on anytime you want. And once you turn it on, you are then being charged per minute for that time it's on. Okay, up to that budget that we showed you in the previous video, right? So we're not using it, we'll turn them off. There will be certain times in the course where if we're doing a demo, we might ask you to keep it running so that other students can access your server or access the websites on your server. So, but normally if that's not happening and you're not using it, you're going to want to shut it down. Okay. Don't get confused by terminate. Terminate is not the same thing as stop. Terminate basically removes it completely. It goes away. All right. So I've actually terminated a couple. So since these are terminated, I can't connect to them and I can't start them, right? So these are terminated. Eventually these two will go away, right? The stop state, again, I can restart, right? So you can kind of see the difference between the two. So once you terminate one, it's gone, all right? So you'd have to recreate it from scratch again. So just be careful not to confuse the two. Stop means you can restart it later. Terminate means it goes away completely and needs to be completely rebuilt. So you'll lose everything that's on there. So again, kind of just keep that in mind when you're doing work here. The other thing too is with the actions here after you terminate, they will go away eventually, and so just keep track of that. All right. Now we're going to connect in, but before we do so, we have to do one additional thing, and it's going to be important. Notice I mentioned there's a website. There's an IP address here, right? 52.204.97.221. Every time I start and restart this instance, I'm going to get a new IP address. That's not really going to be good, especially if we wanted to provide maybe a DNS hyperlink or a website link to somebody that provides a name that they can use for a longer period. We need to keep these IP addresses around longer. And in order to do that, we have to create what is called an elastic IP. So if you drill down to the bottom here and click on elastic IPs, you're going to see that you can create these additional IP addresses. What elastic IP means is that we're going to allocate a new IP address, and when we do that, that IP address is going to be for us to use whenever we want. Okay, so so here's the one I just created. All right, and if I select it now, I can allocate it, and I can actually associate it with an elastic IP address. So allocating one just simply says, hey AWS, give me a permanent IP address that I can use, and it's always going to stay the same. It's not going to go away. It's mine to use. All right. You are not charged for these addresses as long as you associate it with an instance. Okay, so that's what we have to do. If you don't associate with an instance, there's a nominal fee for it to basically say, look, they want you to use them. If you're gonna eat up an IP address, they want to make sure you're actually using it. So they want you to associate it to an instance. So we're going to associate the one I just created, and we're going to pick our IP address. Make sure we pick the one we just created, and click associate. Now that IP address is now associated with that EC2 instance. And if you go back and you look at the running instances, and if I go back here and look at my docs here, notice now it's actually highlighted, right? It's actually got a hyperlink, meaning it just lets you know that this is actually using elastic IP. Okay, so that'll stick around. So that's important because, again, if you didn't do this, then every time I stopped this and restarted it, I would be getting a new IP address, meaning any kind of hyperlinks that I create, or if I in this or the associated DNS name that I'm using, would always be changing. We don't want that. Okay, so just kind of remember to do that. All right, now that we have our instance, we're ready to go. We have the security set up. Let's go ahead and connect in. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to come up here to the connect, and you're going to be presented with a connect your instance dialog here. And here's where we have to get the administrator password. Remember, we have this instance sitting out there on the internet that AWS created for us. When it created it, it created an administrator account, which is a default you get with Windows. They need to give us the password for that. In order to give us the password in a secure manner, we have to use the same key. We have to get it from them, and we have to use that key pair. Remember, we created that key pair. I still have it sitting here. I called mine it431key.pem. If I go ahead and open that, I'm going to be presented with the option to choose a key file. So I have to go back and choose that one that I created. So that's the one that I created before, and I select that one, and it's going to give me this public key or this private key information and allow me to decrypt the password using that public key. So there is the password. So that's the administrator password. So the easiest thing there is go and copy that to the clipboard. Now let's copy to the clipboard. Now I can select download remote desktop file and open it up. All right, so there it is. It's going to give me a little warning message. Click connect on that one. And there I'm going to be presented with credentials. If you get this far, then that means that you have properly configured your security groups to allow the RDP service. All right, so if we get this far, that's a good sign. So go ahead and paste in the password that we got. You can select remember me if you want. Select OK. And click. You see that there's kind of a warning here about the certificate. It's fine. We don't really worry about that for right now. And now I will be presented with a window, so I can kind of give you a sense of what it looks like. All right, so now it's connecting me in to my EC2 instance that I created. So here I have a a fully running Windows 2019 image that I can use to provision and set up IIS and all those good things, which we're going to do next. Okay, it takes a few minutes when you first come up here to go ahead and maximize it. So yes here, it doesn't really matter. Actually, I'll say no. So again, when you first log in the first time using administrator password, it's going to do some initial setup for your account on the instance itself. Another nice thing about when you're inside an EC2 instance is it'll kind of give you some information here on the desktop. It'll give you the host name, the instance ID. Here's our public IP address and private IP address. Again, more information about the instance size. So we know this is a T2 extra large instance, what zone it's sitting in, and so forth. So you can kind of get all that good information. Okay, so if I come down here to the bottom, here I've got a Windows server, and we're going to do a couple things to allow us to then start utilizing this service as a website. We have to enable, we have to tell Windows that we want it to act as a web server. All right, so let's do a couple things there to set that up. All right, first thing is we're going to come up here and we're going to select Server Manager. And when we're in Server Manager, we're going to come over here and select Local Server. And we're going to go ahead and turn off the settings. So by default, Windows 2019, it's locked down, or at least since it's generally expecting to be used as a server, generally you want to lock it down so that people aren't browsing the internet, or you don't have websites that are having security issues on here. So it locks down, so it has some additional IE security, which can be annoying, especially if we want to use this machine to test out our websites locally. So we want to turn off this. But again, this is only because this particular EC2 instance we're going to be using as a development box. So when you're doing development, security kind of gets in the way, right? So we kind of try to turn some of those things off just for our purposes to make life easier. But again, in a production environment, you'd want to leave it the way it was, but we'll turn those off. Okay, if you didn't do this, then anytime you brought up a browser and browsed to a website, you would be getting a bunch of warning messages. So we want to turn that off. All right, so let's go ahead and make sure that got changed. All right, there you go. So it's off. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to the dashboard here, and we're going to come up and we're going to add a new role. By default, Windows does not have support for a web to act as a website. We have to tell it we want this machine to behave or have the support of a website. So we have to do that by adding a new role. So we're going to come down here and select the role we want, and we're going to select, we're going to come down here to server roles and select web server. And what that'll do is that will enable IIS. So IIS is Microsoft's web service. Okay. So if you don't have those services running, then it's not going to be able to understand HTTP requests. So we need a service that understands HTTP requests, and that's what all of the websites we create are going to be using. So we're going to add that. Click Next here. All right, and then on this one, we are going to be good. I don't think there's anything we have to change on this one. Let's keep going through the wizard here. Now the next step when we get into the service roles, we have to do one thing here. We have to come down to Management Studio here, and we need to turn on application development, right? And then we'll expand that, and we need to make sure that we have support for .NET. So this allows us to create .NET applications and host them. And we're also going to turn on ASP.NET 4.7 as well. So we'll be using ASP.NET 4.7. So you have to do these. If you don't do those two steps, then IIS is running, but you won't be able to host .NET-based applications. So those are additional steps you have to do. Let's go ahead and hit Next, and go ahead and install it. Let that go for a minute until it's done, and then we'll go ahead and test out that we have IIS running correctly. All right, once the installation is succeeded, Right, we have that all done there. Looks like it's all, progress bar is over, it's 100%. We can go ahead and close this. So now I can also go up here and close down the server manager. And let's just confirm that we have IIS running. So let's bring up IIS, I'm sorry, Internet Explorer. All right, go ahead and select use the defaults here for that, that's fine. All right, again, this is that extra warning message we get since we turned off enhanced security before. It's just a warning message letting us know that it's turned off. Again, this is because this is kind of expecting to be run as a server, so usually it has extra security. So what we want to do is we want to test out that IIS is running, and we're going to use a special loopback address, a local host. So if you ever want to test out your own machine to see how, if it's running correctly from a website perspective, you can use a special name here called localhost. All right, and what that'll do is it basically says, I don't want you to go outside and go find a website. Use the website. Use this particular machine's at IP address instead. All right, if you get this far, if you type in http://localhost and you see this screen, then we're good. We now have IIS running, and we have everything we need to begin creating .NET-based applications and hosting them on this EC2 instance. Okay, if you don't get this far, please go back and revisit and make sure that this is all working correctly prior to continuing. Okay, last but not least, what we want to do is we want to make sure, so this basically says we can get to any websites that are running on this machine itself. Okay, localhost just is a simple loopback IP address. So if I wanted to test out that if I can reach this server from the internet, how would I do that? Well, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to kind of just drag that down out of the way so that I still have it running. So my EC2 instance is running in a window here. I'm going to go back to my browser, and I'm going to go back to the AWS console, and I'm going to go back here to my box here. So here it is. Remember, we said we created a public IP for this one. So what I can do is I can take this public IP and go to a new browser, and if I paste this IP address, if everything's working correctly, I should have access to reach my server. So this is the second step. If you've gotten this working, then that also means that you're able to reach port 80 and run HTTP requests into your EC2 instance, and everything is connected. All the security is ready to go. So that's another kind of way to just test that you have full connectivity to what you have. So we're going to be creating additional websites. I'll also mention that you also have the option, there's a public DNS that's also created. If I can copy that one, and instead of putting the IP address, instead I will use this special DNS name that's also created for me. It does the same thing. It's just a matter of one's a DNS entry, the other one is the actual IP address itself, right? So all a DNS does is resolve a name to an IP address. So behind the scenes, it's going off and doing a resolution to determine what IP address goes with it. But in any event, it's just doing the same thing. So now that I have this, and I've created an elastic IP address, anytime I create any websites that I want to host on my EC2 instance, I can use this address as the starting point. Okay, and we're going to create some additional websites on top of this, but that's kind of how that would work. So everything we do from here on out is going to use this IP address. Okay, in the next video, we'll go ahead and continue setting up our development environment.